The paperwork they kept is the weapon they used. Editor's note, updated June 20th, 2026. Two developments since this article was drafted on June 11th. On June 15th, a federal immigration judge granted asylum to the California woman at the center of this piece. She will not be sent to Iran, but the gap that put her there remains open and the next woman is waiting. And in Sacramento, California's SB 381, which passed the Senate 35-0, is now under threat. Assembly Health Committee Chair Bonta, who publicly endorsed the bill 3 weeks ago, has reversed course and is demanding a consent-based amendment that advocates call a revival of the 1983 Mommy May I law. Both threads are folded into the piece below, including a closing dispatch on the live Sacramento fight. Somewhere in California, a woman in her 50s is waiting to find out if she will be deported to Iran. She has lived in the United States her entire adult life. She was adopted as a young child by a United States Air Force veteran. She has no criminal record. She is a Christian. Iran's government classifies conversion from Islam to Christianity as a capital offense. She is not a citizen of the United States because her adoptive parents assumed the citizenship was automatic, that the state, having sanctioned every step of her adoption, had completed the paperwork. It had not, and now the same state that stamped her adoption decree, issued her amended birth certificate, and welcomed her into an American family, is reviewing her file for irregularities under a program called Operation True Parent. The name alone is worth sitting with, Operation True Parent. The framing presupposes a truer parent than the one the state previously designated, that the biological record, the one the adoption system spent decades erasing, is now the record that counts. The architecture that sealed the original wound is now using the wound against her. This is not a new problem, it is not an oversight, it is the architecture of silence completing its logic. The score. We ran the law at the center of this story through the omission framework, the same instrument behind TD's World Report. The Child Citizenship Act of 2000 scores a current of 9 against a true of 91, risk delta plus 82. A score that low isn't a near miss, it's confirmation that the law was never built to see this harm coming, or never built to care. Its 2001 cutoff left an estimated 18,000 to 75,000 pre-2001 adoptees permanently outside automatic citizenship protection. That gap is what Operation True Parent is weaponizing right now. The gap that was never an accident. In 2000, Congress passed the Child Citizenship Act to fix a known problem. Thousands of intercountry adoptees brought to America by U.S. citizen parents had never been naturalized, because the process required a separate application many parents didn't know about or never completed. The fix only ran forward. The cutoff was February 27, 2001. Anyone already 18 by that date didn't qualify. Congressional staff knew this. Advocacy groups flagged it during drafting. The CBO had the numbers. The door stayed shut on everyone already inside the gap anyway. Between 18,000 and 75,000 people have lived inside it since, some unaware until a passport application or a police stop forced the question. 7 administrations, 4 of them Democratic, have had the chance to close it. None has. The paperwork and the silence inside it. To understand the gap, understand the amended birth certificate. When an adoption is finalized, the state issues a new birth certificate naming the adoptive parents as parents of record, sealing the original. On paper, it's administrative procedure. In practice, it's a philosophical claim. An adoptee's origin is whatever the institution writes down. The Child Citizenship Act makes the same claim about citizenship. You are a citizen if the paperwork says so. If it doesn't, that's not your failure, it's the state's. You pay for it anyway. Same mechanism, same silence. Operation True Parent is what happens when that silence stops being enough. The second severance. The first severance was the adoption itself. Biological family removed, birth name replaced, original record sealed, the new family declared the real one. Operation True Parent performs a second severance, in reverse. The American identity the adoptee was required to build because the original one was taken is now classified as insufficient grounds to stay. The country of origin, made inaccessible and irrelevant for decades, is suddenly where the state says they belong. The state calls the first severance placement and the second removal. The mechanism is identical. An institution decides where a person belongs, and the person has no standing to object. At least 49 cases have surfaced since DHS launched Operation True Parent in January. Lawyers describe clients lying low, avoiding any contact with law enforcement, not because they've done anything wrong, but because in this enforcement climate, any interaction can become a removal proceeding. Some have lived here 50 years. Some are veterans. Some, like the woman in California, face deportation to countries where their faith or politics makes them targets. Why nothing changes? The Adoptee Citizenship Act of 2024 would have fixed this. It died without a vote. The POF Act has been reintroduced across multiple sessions and still hasn't passed, and even its current version leaves people unprotected. Those never legally finalized, the undocumented, the already deported. In February 2024, a year before Operation True Parent launched, 31 members of Congress wrote to DHS asking for prosecutorial discretion to protect this population. Nothing was implemented. The problem was documented, named, and ignored. Then the next administration acted on it anyway, just not the way anyone asked for. The reason nothing changes, Congress keeps treating this as an immigration problem. It isn't. These are people the state brought here as children through a legal process it controlled start to finish. The failure is the state's. The bill is being paid by the people it failed. Call it non-adoptee bias if you want the academic term. Legislators without adoption in their own family history keep applying immigration logic to an adoption problem, arriving at solutions that ignore the one fact that actually matters. These people were designated American by the same government now trying to remove them. The document that completes the logic. There's one document at the center of every case, the amended birth certificate. The adoption system used it to erase the biological record and produce the adoptee. Operation True Parent is using the same document read backward to resurrect that record and deport them. Same institution, same document, same silence, weaponized in opposite directions against the same person. This isn't a policy failure. A failure implies the policy was designed to succeed. The adoption system was designed to transfer children while managing institutional liability. The citizenship gap was designed to close going forward while leaving prior liability unresolved. Operation True Parent is designed to enforce this administration's priorities against a population with no political constituency and no legal protection. The paperwork they kept is the weapon they used. The silence they built is what makes it work. The front that's open right now. This isn't only a federal story. California's SB 381 would restore unrestricted original birth certificate access to adult adoptees, the same kind of document at the center of this entire piece, fought over at the state level. It passed the Senate 35-0. 3 weeks ago, Assembly Health Committee Chair Bonta publicly backed it. She has since reversed course and is demanding an amendment that would require adult adoptees to get their birth parents' consent before accessing their own birth certificate, petitioning a court if it's refused. Advocates call it a revival of California's 1983 Mommy May I law. It is not a compromise. It is the same architecture in miniature being rebuilt in real time by someone who said 3 weeks ago she opposed rebuilding it. A hearing may happen June 23rd. If it does, advocates plan to fill the room. On June 15th, the woman at the center of this piece was granted asylum. She survived the machine because she had lawyers, media coverage, faith organizations behind her, and the specific political weight of being a decorated veteran's daughter facing deportation to a country the U.S. is functionally at war with. Most people inside the gap have none of that. She's no longer waiting, the next one is. And in Sacramento, right now, someone is deciding whether the next document gets sealed the same way the last one was. This has been thoughtless delineation.
I want you to imagine a scenario that, honestly, it sounds less like American history and more like some sort of dystopian thriller.
Yeah, it really does.
Right. So imagine the government legally makes you the child of a United States military veteran. And as part of this incredibly formal, court-sanctioned process, the state permanently seals your biological past. They hand you a brand new, legally binding American identity.
Mm-hmm.
You build your entire life on that foundation. You pay taxes, build a community, maybe you have kids. And then 50 years later, that exact same government uses the very past it erased as the legal justification to deport you.
It's an institutional paradox that almost defies belief. I mean, the very state apparatus that creates your identity, decades later, weaponizes that exact same paperwork to completely dismantle it.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
And welcome to this deep dive. Today we are looking at an upcoming article draft for the Thoughtless Delineation Substack. It's titled, "The Paperwork They Kept is the Weapon They Used."
Such a striking title.
It really is. And we've got a stack of sources here to go through. We're talking legislative tracking, policy scoring data, real-time legal updates. And our goal today is to unpack the cold bureaucratic machinery behind what is a intensely human crisis.
Right.
And just to set the tone for you, the listener, we aren't here to wallow in despair, but we also aren't going to sugarcoat systemic harm either. We're looking at this with a very clear post-tragic lens.
Which is really the only way to genuinely understand the scope of what we're talking about today, because, this isn't some theoretical legal exercise. Right now, there is a woman in California, she's in her 50s, who has just spent months waiting to find out if the U.S. government was going to deport her to Iran.
And we need to look at who she is, because every single detail highlights the sheer absurdity of this machine. She was adopted as a young child by a U.S. Air Force veteran.
Yeah.
She's lived in the United States her entire adult life. She has absolute zero criminal record. And on top of all of that, she's a Christian.
And that last detail, that is not incidental. It is the absolute hinge of the entire crisis here. The Department of Homeland Security was moving to deport her to Iran, which is a country where the government classifies conversion from Islam to Christianity as a capital offense.
So it's a death sentence.
It is a literal death sentence, yes.
Right. So the immediate question you have to be asking yourself is, how on earth is this woman not a U.S. citizen?
Mm-hmm.
Her adoptive parents went through the system.
Mm-hmm.
The state sanctioned and finalized every single step of her adoption. Her parents reasonably assumed that the government had, completed the citizenship paperwork.
Because that is the logical assumption to make, right? When a state court formally issues an adoption decree and an amended birth certificate, you think you're done. But the citizenship wasn't automatic. And now, the exact same state that stamped her adoption decree, the state that legally welcomed her into an American family, is just combing through her file looking for irregularities. And they're doing this under a very specific Department of Homeland Security initiative. It's called Operation True Parent.
Operation True Parent. I have to stop you there because that name is just chilling. It's completely Orwellian.
It's a phrase that reveals the entire institutional mindset, honestly. By calling it Operation True Parent, the state is making a philosophical declaration.
Right.
They are suddenly deciding that there is a truer parent than the adoptive one they themselves legally designated and codified 50 years ago.
So the same government that takes 6 months to renew my passport has somehow engineered a 50-year slow motion identity heist.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
They're saying that the biological record, the very record the adoption system spent decades intentionally erasing and, sealing away by law, is suddenly the only record that counts.
Exactly. The biological record is essentially resurrected solely for the purpose of enforcement.
Wait, hold on. I need to challenge the mechanics of this. Because I understand bureaucratic incompetence, believe me. But how can a federal agency legally use a sealed document for deportation?
Wow.
If family court sealed her origin, doesn't the adoption decree override an immigration file? How do they even get their hands on the old paperwork?
And that right there is where the friction between state family law and federal immigration law creates this devastating trap.
Okay.
So, the state family court seals the biological birth record and issues the new identity. But the federal government holds the original immigration entry file, the A file, the orphan petition, the visa that brought the child over in the first place.
Oh, I see.
Right. And because the family never filed a separate naturalization certificate, the federal government treats that original entry visa as the ruling document. They basically ignore the state-level adoption decree and say, according to our federal immigration database, you are an alien who never naturalized.
So it's a massive jurisdictional loophole. If we think about this from the perspective of severance, the first severance, what the state calls placement, was the state removing the biological family and forcing a new American identity onto a child.
Mm-hmm.
And now the state is performing a second severance, what they call removal, but in reverse. It's like, think of a theater director, right?
Okay.
A director forces an actor to learn a completely new script, literally burns the old one in front of them, and then decades later fires them for not remembering the original lines.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. The direction of the severance changes, but the mechanism is identical.
Right.
In both directions, an institution dictates exactly where a person belongs, and the person themselves has absolutely no legal standing to object.
But how did thousands of people end up in this vulnerable position in the first place?
Yeah.
To get to the root of this, we have to look at a massive legislative gap, specifically the Child Citizenship Act of 2000.
Right.
Because everyone cheered when this passed.
Right.
It was supposed to fix this exact problem.
Yeah, it was absolutely intended to be the fix. By the late 1990s, Congress realized that thousands of intercountry adoptees who were brought to America by U.S. citizen parents had never actually been naturalized.
Because of that separate paperwork you mentioned.
Exactly. The old process required this convoluted, entirely separate application that many parents either didn't know about, couldn't afford, or just, assumed was handled by the adoption finalization itself. So the act was drafted to make citizenship automatic for these adoptees.
But they completely ignored the older generations of adoptees.
They did, yes.
Yeah.
The legislation included a hard, unyielding cutoff date, February 27, 2001. If you were an adoptee who was already 18 years old by that exact date, you were completely locked out of automatic citizenship.
Meaning, if your birthday was, February 26, 1983, you were just left out in the cold.
Yep.
But why 18? Why treat adult adoptees differently if they were all adopted as children?
Because legislators applied standard derivative citizenship logic.
Which means what exactly?
Well, that's the logic that usually applies to minors immigrating with their immigrant parents. And they just blindly overlaid it onto inter-country adoption. They completely failed to recognize that these adults had been legally adopted as minors decades prior.
Oh, wow.
And, this wasn't some hidden, unforeseeable flaw either. Congressional staff knew about this cutoff. Advocacy groups were actively flagging it during the drafting process.
So they knew.
The Congressional Budget Office had the data. They knew exactly who was being excluded, yet the door stayed shut. And because of that arbitrary date, an estimated 18,000 to 75,000 pre-2001 adoptees have been trapped in this gap ever since.
Okay, before we get too deep into the fallout of that, break down this data from the TD Nexus Observatory for me, because the source notes the omission score for the Child Citizenship Act of 2000.
Right, let's look at that.
It says the current score is 9, the true score is 91, and the risk delta is positive 82. What scale is this on, and what does an omission score actually measure in this context?
So, the omission framework is a policy scoring instrument. It's used to measure how effectively a law protects the specific vulnerable population it claims to serve on a scale of 0 to 100.
Okay, out of 100.
Right. So a current score of 9 out of 100 means the law is fundamentally broken when it comes to addressing the core issue for this group. The true score of 91 is what the law would score if it actually closed the gap and protected all inter-country adoptees.
So that 82-point risk delta is literally the mathematical representation of human beings falling through the cracks.
Exactly.
I mean, an omission score of 9 proves this wasn't an oversight or a little loophole. A score that abysmal is confirmation that the law was never built to see this harm coming, or frankly, it simply wasn't built to care.
Yeah.
Some of these adoptees didn't even know they lacked citizenship until a routine passport application or like a minor police stop forced the question. How can 7 different administrations, so we're talking spanning both major political parties, have the chance to close this gap and just leave it open?
It really comes down to a systemic blind spot that researchers and advocates refer to as non-adoptee bias.
Non-adoptee bias. I mean, that names the problem very clearly.
It does, yeah. Legislators, who largely do not have the lived experience of adoption, they keep applying immigration logic to what is fundamentally an adoption problem.
Right.
They look at these individuals and they see immigrants who simply failed to naturalize. They entirely ignore the fact that the state brought these children here through a legal process that the state itself controlled from start to finish.
Exactly.
So the failure to secure citizenship belongs entirely to the state, but the cost of that failure is being paid by the people the state failed.
Which brings us back to the physical mechanism that enforces this whole nightmare. We've talked about the legislative gap, but how does the state actually weaponize a person's existence against them?
Mm-hmm.
And it all circles back to one document, the amended birth certificate.
Yes. And, on paper, to a layperson, an amended birth certificate just looks like a standard administrative procedure.
Right, just routine filing.
Exactly. When an adoption is finalized, the state issues this new certificate, naming the adoptive parents as the parents of record, and it legally seals the original biological record away.
But in practice, it's not just paperwork. It is a massive philosophical claim.
Absolutely.
The state is essentially saying that an adoptee's origin is whatever the institution decides to write down. The silence inside that document, the erased history, is the very foundation of the citizenship gap.
Yeah.
You are an American citizen if our paperwork says so. And if it doesn't, well, that's not our failure, but You're going to pay the price anyway.
And this is where Operation True Parent executes that complete reversal of institutional logic we talked about earlier.
Right.
The state uses the original immigration document to resurrect the sealed biological record, the exact one they forced into hiding, to justify deporting the adoptee. It is the exact same institution, weaponizing the exact same silence against the exact same person.
And the climate of fear this is creating among adult adoptees is just palpable. I mean, since January, at least 49 of these cases have surfaced. Lawyers are actively telling their clients to lie low.
Yeah, lie low.
Think about what that actually means for a moment. You are in your 50s, maybe you're a veteran yourself, you have grandkids, you've paid a lifetime of taxes, and you are terrified to drive to the grocery store because a broken taillight could trigger a removal proceeding to a country you don't even remember.
And this is happening despite numerous desperate attempts at legislative fixes. I mean, the Adoptee Citizenship Act of 2024 was supposed to resolve this.
And what happened to that?
It died without even getting a vote.
Wow. What about the PAAF Act? Because that's been floating around the legislative tracking for a while. What does that actually propose, and why isn't it working?
So the PAAF Act has been reintroduced across multiple sessions as a supposed fix, but it's a deeply flawed patch.
Yeah.
Well, even in its current version, it leaves highly vulnerable people entirely unprotected. Specifically, those who were brought over but whose adoptions were never legally finalized by their American parents. It leaves out undocumented adoptees and those who have already been deported.
So it's half measures.
Exactly. It refuses to cleanly sever the knot. And furthermore, in February of 2024, so this is a full year before Operation True Parent even launched, 31 members of Congress wrote a letter to DHS specifically asking for prosecutorial discretion to protect this exact population.
And let me guess, the agency just completely ignored them.
Absolutely nothing was implemented. The problem was documented, it was named, it was quantified, and it was ignored.
Unbelievable.
And then the agency acted on the issue anyway, just in the exact opposite direction of what those 31 members of Congress pleaded for.
So we have this federal architecture of silence and control. But this isn't just a federal history lesson, is it? I mean, if the federal government is doing this with entry documents and amended birth certificates, what's stopping individual states from stepping in and fixing the paperwork themselves? Because this exact same institutional architecture is being fought over right now at the state level.
Yes, it is. The through line from federal deportation to state-level vital records is very direct. Let's look at California and Senate Bill 381.
Right, SB 381. This is a bill meant to restore unrestricted access to original birth certificates for adult adoptees, which frankly is just common sense.
Mm-hmm.
Adult human beings should be allowed to possess their own original vital records. And the California Senate completely agreed. The bill passed with a resounding 35-0 vote.
Unanimous.
Unanimous, yes. But then we saw a severe reversal in the Assembly. Assembly Health Committee Chair Mia Bonta publicly backed the bill initially. However, 3 weeks later, she completely reversed her course.
After publicly backing it.
Yes, she is now demanding a consent-based amendment. Why? I mean, how does a unanimous, common-sense bill suddenly hit a brick wall? What was her stated reasoning for demanding this amendment?
Well, the stated reasoning usually falls back on a sudden, heightened concern for the privacy of the biological parents. The amendment would force adult adoptees to get their biological parents' active consent, or otherwise formally petition a court just to see their own original birth certificate.
That is incredibly frustrating, and it completely ignores the adoptee as an adult.
It does.
Advocates are calling this a revival of California's 1983 Mommy May I law. You are treating a 50-year-old adult like a perpetual child who needs a permission slip to know what hospital they were born in.
Right.
How does a progressive state legislature suddenly whiplash back into a progressive 1980s paternalistic law?
If we look at this impartially, through a systemic lens, we can see exactly what is happening. This is the federal architecture of silence rebuilt in miniature at the state level. Mm-hmm. It is not a compromise. It is the exact same dynamic of an institution demanding ultimate control over an adoptee's foundational documents. Whether it's DHS deporting someone based on a hidden file or a state assembly demanding a court petition to see a birth certificate, the state wants to remain the absolute gatekeeper of the adoptee's identity.
But the advocates aren't backing down. There's a critical hearing planned for June 23, and advocates are organizing to absolutely fill the room.
Good.
They see the connection clearly.
Huh.
They know that sealing a document in Sacramento is built on the exact same institutional logic that deports a woman to Iran.
Which brings us to a crucial update on that very woman in California. On June 15th, there was a major development in her case.
Oh, really?
Yes, a federal immigration judge just granted her asylum.
Wow. So she won't be sent to Iran.
She will not.
That's incredible news.
It is, and while it is undeniably a massive relief, we must view this through our post-tragic lens.
Right.
We have to acknowledge the sobering reality of why she was granted asylum and what it actually took to get there.
Right, exactly. We can't just slap a happy ending on this, dust off our hands, and walk away. Because the machine didn't suddenly grow a conscience.
Not at all. She survived this machine because of immense privilege.
Mm-hmm.
She had a dedicated team of lawyers fighting tooth and nail. She had widespread media coverage amplifying her story. She had powerful faith organizations advocating on her behalf.
Right.
And crucially, she carried the highly specific political weight of being the daughter of a decorated U.S. veteran facing deportation to a country the United States is, functionally at odds with.
So she just had enough institutional armor to break the teeth of the gears.
Precisely. And most of the 18,000 to 75,000 people who are still trapped inside that citizenship gap have absolutely none of those advantages.
Yeah.
They do not have media campaigns. They don't have high-priced legal teams. The gap remains wide open, and the next person is already waiting in line.
And right now, in Sacramento, someone is deciding whether the next foundational document gets sealed the exact same way the last one was. This is exactly why we wanted to bring this deep dive to you today. It's heavy, it's frustrating, but understanding the precise mechanics of this harm is the only way to begin dismantling it. So if you want to explore the lived experiences and really dig deeper into the policy data behind all of this, I highly encourage you to read the full essay on the Thoughtless Delineation Substack. It is absolutely essential reading.
It really is. It takes the cold data we've discussed today and grounds it firmly in the embodied reality of those whose lives are, dictated by these missing documents.
I will leave you with one final thought to mull over today. We started by talking about the jarring paradox of a government handing you a new identity, sealing your past, and then punishing you for it decades later.
Yeah.
So ask yourself this. If a single piece of government paperwork has the power to entirely rewrite who you are, and 50 years later can be legally flicked backward to erase your very existence in the country you call home, who actually owns your identity?